god. My hair looks like a freaking Final Fantasy character. Alright guys, so this is just my 2 cents and also my short opinion on everything going on with the King of Kong documentary controversy with Twin Galaxies and Billy Mitchell. Now, if you're not familiar, I'll make this really short because most of you are familiar. Billy Mitchell is very famous from being the high score holder, the original high score holder of Donkey Kong the arcade unit, as well as other arcades from the 80s. That's what he built his career on, basically, from his fame as being the best Donkey Kong player in history. Years later, a documentary comes out called The King of Kong, where a guy named Steve Wiebe challenges his score. He was unemployed at the time, from what I remember from the documentary, and challenges Billy Mitchell's score, beats it, but then all these weird shady things happen throughout the documentary, such as Billy Mitchell not wanting to compete, trying to avoid Steve Wiebe like the plague, and pretty much submitting a bullshit videotape at the end of the film saying that he had the highest score ever, when in fact nothing was ever verified or proven. Now fast forward to this year, and it comes out that not only is Billy Mitchell's scores unverified, go figure, and not trustworthy, but Twin Galaxies has been kind of forging scores and faking everything. Well, not everything, but faking a lot of things when it comes to scores submitted by referees and whatever else. Now, not knowing the insides of this, because I'm just a outlooker, you know, I'm a guy looking in who watched the documentary at first years ago. It was obvious when you saw the documentary that there were a lot of shady things going on with Twin Galaxies, Walter Day, and Billy Mitchell's little crew that he had hanging around throughout the entire film. Billy Mitchell and himself seems like a complete asshole throughout the entire film. First of all, not wanting to compete because for some reason or another he feels the need that he doesn't need to prove that he is the better Donkey Kong player when this is like a Guinness Book of World Records title that's on the line. And for some reason, Twin Galaxies catered to Billy Mitchell the entire time. Now, years later, it came out that Billy Mitchell was like financially supporting Twin Galaxies, so he had a lot more of a push when it came to scores and everything else like that. And also, I guess he threatened a lot of people too, which is neither here or there because that's all hearsay and people's claims. I'm not gonna just base my opinion on claims, but Billy Mitchell doesn't seem like the kind of guy who wouldn't take that route, because he is, like I said in the documentary, portrayed as a complete dick. And all of his crew that are around him, his lawyer or attorney or whatever, a proclaimed liar when it came to the original score of Donkey Kong, which is in the documentary. He admits that he lied about his score, and yet he becomes an attorney, go figure. And he's Billy Mitchell's right-hand man throughout the entire fucking film, which, again, doesn't help Billy's argument about being the best player, having all these liars and yes men around him the entire time. Then you have the entire crew surrounding him at Twin Galaxies, which is like this little snake nerd guy, this leech that like hangs around Steve Wiebe the entire film whenever he's trying to break a score on the unit, saying, I was gonna be the first guy to ever beat this high Donkey Kong score at Fun Spot. Everyone hated that guy. Everyone I know that's ever seen that movie hated that guy. Personally, of course I don't know him, but in the documentary, I would fucking hate that guy if I met him in real life. Just the whole fact that he acts like that and is going around making phone calls every 5 seconds to Billy Mitchell going, he's getting really close to the score. I'm gonna try to hang around and maybe he's gonna mess up. You know, fuck that guy. And now that everything is coming out that Billy Mitchell's scores were all based on MAME machines, which if you're not familiar with that, it's an arcade unit that's not officially licensed to be counted as a real score for Twin Galaxies. Main Machines have multiple arcade games on one unit. So they're playing off emulation, they're not actually playing off a board. So that would make his scores invalid. Billy Mitchell claims that he's never done anything like that before in multiple interviews. And pretty much still saying that he doesn't need to prove anything, even though the internet is fucking exploding with everyone calling him a liar. We have legitimate world record holders on YouTube and on the internet calling him out and calling out Twin Galaxies and Walter Day. Walter Day, even though he portrays himself to be this super nice old man, I don't know why everyone keeps defending him, because in the King of Kong documentary, he acts like an asshole. He acts like an asshole. You can't argue that he's an asshole in the movie. He gives scores to Billy Mitchell that are based off a videotape, which he originally took away from Steve Wiebe at the beginning of the film, and made him compete 3 different times throughout the movie because videotape scores were not allowed. Now here's where it gets really weird, because when you look into this, I would have never known that there's this whole sub-underground culture of people that grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s or whatever, that are super hardcore dedicated to getting world records on arcade units. And it's like this whole underground scene. There's a lot of shady things that happen with this because of Twin Galaxies and their website. Now, when you start looking into the information about this movie, you start looking at interviews dating all the way back from 10 years ago and up to today, in most recent years, there's a lot of speculation going on that this King of Kong film was fake, that everything was scripted by Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe and the director, Seth Gordon. Now, what I find most interesting is, as all this controversy has been kind of going on throughout the month, you haven't heard one word from Seth Gordon, you haven't heard one word from Steve Wiebe, but you've been hearing a ton of shit from Dwayne Richard and other record holders throughout the arcade scene, that King of Kong was fake. That this was all such a planned out thing between Steve Wiebe and Billy Mitchell. A fake rivalry, and apparently there was a world record holder that was already above Billy Mitchell in the King of Kong, but they just ignored him altogether. You can find his interviews and stuff like that on YouTube of him pretty much calling out the director, Seth Gordon, and Steve Wiebe and all of them, because they all accepted money to be in this documentary that's supposed to be true, but yet there's a lot of liberties taken to make the narrative go a certain way. I don't know if any of that is true or not, because documentaries traditionally are supposed to be based on fact, when in fact it seems like not all the facts were shown. Now I get it, in films there's supposed to be, you know, a narrative, a good guy and a bad guy, and they did that with this. And when I found this interview with Seth Gordon on the internet, and it was from a few years ago when that Horrible Bosses movie was supposed to come out, where they talk briefly about the King of Kong, and the guy that's interviewing Seth Gordon basically says that he rewatched the film and it's really amazing how the story went the way it did. It almost seems fictional. And when he says this, Seth Gordon doesn't say a fucking word. He doesn't even have like an expression or a retort to this. And I'm going to show you this right now.
Billy's actions and shenanigans and kind of, you know, behavior which none of us could have predicted became the movie, because it was so sort of diabolical and thought out and like elaborate and
So you were following them with cameras at this point, like you had already decided to like make it about just the Donkey Kong and these two guys, and they were each aware that you were filming the other person.
Yeah, that whole world knew that we were making this movie. They didn't know really what it was, but we didn't either. I mean, we were trying to figure it out as we went, as a good documentary should. We didn't know the outcome, but then Billy became the most interesting thing, and how different Billy was from Steve became even more interesting, and then what he did to stop him, and it was just great.
Yeah, it really builds like a fictional
such tension,
story.
yeah.
Builds like a fictional
such tension,
story.
yeah.
Now with that, it seems very odd and very strange that this even happened, but what are you gonna do? Now, the only thing I can say that would make logical sense, and I think makes most logical sense for everyone, is Billy Mitchell needs to do either one or two things. He needs to prove his scores live at FunSpot in front of everyone. No more of this piggybacking off of your records that you did in the 80s. That's great and all, but like many people have said before me, records are there to be broken, okay? Just because you built one career off of one thing in your life doesn't mean someone's gonna come around and do it better than you later on. And lying to keep that title just makes you look like a complete asshole and discredits a bunch of other people's scores, not to mention discredits the world of video games as a whole media, not all video games, but of course that genre of video games, arcades, and scores that people are proud of. You discredit everyone because you make everyone look like an asshole. You make everyone look unhonest and discreditable. So what you gotta do is you gotta prove your scores, or you gotta relinquish your title altogether. No more of this fucking VHS tape shit. With the technology of today's day and age, there is no reason at all for there to be any more VHS tapes submitted, or any more, well, I did this and it's proven anymore. You can't just go, well, I'm gonna, you know, I'm the best video game player in the entire world, and everyone's got to accept my word on that. That's just not how things work. So, those are my thoughts. Was King of Kong faked? I don't know. Where is Seth Gordon in all of this? In all of this. He's not said a word, and maybe it's because he's a giant movie director now and worked with huge stars like Vince Vaughn, ooh. But he was the key component of making this documentary, and I want to know if it was faked. That might not ever come out, but is there going to be a King of Kong 2 because of this now? Maybe. I could see a giant possibility of that happening. And Steve Wiebe hasn't said a fucking word about any of this, which is very shady to me. It makes me question a lot of things in King of Kong now. But that's whatever. The King of Kong, The Fistful of Quarters was a great film. Was it based in truth? I can't tell you that anymore. I thought documentaries were supposed to be showing fact, but in fact, this film, it's too perfect. Now when you look at all the different opinions of people that were in the film and backstories of how they were interviewed in the film, it's too perfect of a narrative to be fact. It's almost like watching a really good reality show at that point. The mysterious videotape that shows up at the last minute, all these, and here's what I want people to get past. Everyone says, you hear people that are not really into the gaming scene or the gaming world commenting on all the different characters in the film. Billy Mitchell, the way he acts, all of his cronies, how they act, people at the arcade areas, how they act. They're not characters. This is really how a lot of people act in real life, especially when it comes to video games. Not everyone is a social person. Not everyone is out there and has got the best social skills and is going to be super open when it comes to talking on camera. And not to mention, some of these people don't really get out very much. It doesn't mean that they're basement dwelling fucking mama's boys who sit there and shit in a can and play video games all day in their basement. That's not what it means at all. But if you're around video games and the video games and the video game world enough in general, you get to know these kind of people. And it's not just with video games, it's with comic books, it's with toys, It's with all that niche thing that goes on in the whole subculture of, I guess, retro video games and stuff like that. You're gonna run across these people all the time. I know many of these people personally that act like that when you go to certain conventions or stores or things like that, arcades. That's how people act. You just get around it and treat them how you want to be treated, basically. Now, those are my final thoughts. I want to know really bad what Seth Gordon thinks about all this. And like I said, Billy Mitchell, you need to nut up or shut up. There's no more of this hearsay and saying I don't have to prove a thing because I'm the best video game player from the 80s and I submit scores all the time. You submit scores without showing proof. You can't do that now. This is not the 80s anymore. So with that, guys, those are my opinions, and I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Retro Forest, and I am out. Oh, and by the way, before you go, if you're interested in retro video game reviews, movie reviews, and whatever else like that, you can find my main channel at Retro or Die. It'll be in the featured channel box over down there or up there somewhere. Anyway, guys, later.